We will start with Sergio Perez. Like I said, 190th race start. He finally claims his first race win in what could be his penultimate race in Formula One, at least for the foreseeable future. Still uncertain as to whether Red Bull will opt to pick him for the second seat or not. Harry, I mean, it's been a long, long time since Perez debuted, and finally he's got that elusive first win.
I know it's a crazy one, and they said it in commentary. He's had so many disappointments in his career, has Checo, and yeah, finally it's so fitting. I mean, it's bittersweet because he might not have a drive come next year, although I'm sure that race may have got the attention of Helmut Marko. I don't know. But yeah, he's deserved that race win for a long time. Ever since he almost caught up and overtook Fernando Alonso in Malaysia back in 2012, he's kind of been destined to be that. And this year he's been so solid, despite missing 2 races because he was positive with COVID. I mean, even without the win, it was going to be an outstanding drive for him because let's not forget he was backwards on lap 1 and last and made a pit stop. And even, I text you both in the middle of it, and not in the middle of it, 10 laps in when we'd restarted, and he was somehow like already in 10th place. I just don't know how he does that. He did it in Portimao, he's done it again. So yeah, even without the win, it was set to be another classic Perez race. And then Mercedes decided that they didn't want to be good for a while, and that really helped him. So yeah, I mean, so happy for Perez, gutted for Russell, but he's got wins coming in the future anyway. So just there's not anyone who's not happy for Perez. It was the same with Gasly, drivers who have been through a lot in their career and really deserved a win. So just happy people all round.
Yeah, and yeah, you allude to Pierre Gasly winning his first race this year and Perez doing the same. Obviously, similar emotion, but for different reasons almost, in that Perez has been in Formula One for so long and finally got to the top of the mountain. Pierre Gasly went through such a torrid time at Red Bull and how he recovered and that arc, if you like. Sam, how do you react to that win today?
I mean, gentlemen, a short look into the past. Eddie Jordan, the legend of late braking and sporting achievement everywhere, started an iconic team. My favourite car in Formula One of all time, that yellow and black Jordan, absolutely gorgeous. And they have had moments throughout history. And now we get to 2020, where a man does not have a seat anymore. They're about to be taken over by Aston Martin, and a billionaire, a 4-time world champion who's having the worst season of his career, is stepping into his seat. And Perez doesn't get a seat. And you know what? He goes, okay, I'm going to wing. I'm going to wing. And what a bloody wing it was. Sergio Perez from last on the grid at one point. He had a damaged car at what I remember. He was part of that contact with Leclerc. Leclerc drove into the side of him. And the fact that Checo has taken the top spot, I've got to be honest, folks. I wanted this more than Russell to win at all. Russell's got a great career ahead of him. He will get to have another go in that Mercedes at some point, whether it be next week if Hamilton doesn't recover or in a couple of seasons' time. Russell's got wings in his future. But Checo Perez, for all we know, and it'd be a shame if it was the case, this could be his last ever Formula One Grand Prix. So I love it. It's what I wanted to see. I was so happy for him and the team. They deserve it. He's deserved it all season. One of the drivers of the season, if not the driver of the season at the moment. I'm elated. I absolutely loved it. He's been through so much. He deserves it more than anyone that I could think of. Russell, you'll get your chance, but this, for me, this was the result that is better than anything else.
And I'm glad you brought up Malaysia, actually, in your opening salvo, Harry, because you can draw sort of comparisons with the Nico Hulkenberg story almost, in that Nico Hulkenberg, same year, 2012, had that great opportunity to finish on the podium and ultimately didn't do so. Brazil that year. And there were questions over when would that next opportunity come. And we think pretty much 8 years down the line, and that next opportunity did never come for him. And whilst we're not talking about podiums here and we're talking about race wins instead, it's essentially the same situation with that Malaysia performance. He's in P2, he's closing on Alonso, He gets what I think to be a foolish message over the radio to say that P2 would be really important for us in the championship, which I know would have been the case for Sauber back then, but seemed to put him off his game. He makes the error and he doesn't win that race. And then the question's asked, because it was a pretty crazy start to 2012, of course, when would that next opportunity come for him? There must have been many who thought that will come at McLaren when he made the move there. It didn't. He moves on to Force India, who, whilst they're competitive, have never really produced a race-winning car over the last 6 or 7 years. So there must have been a lot of doubters, particularly with Perez not seemingly racing next year, or at least the chance of not racing next year. When would that first win come? Would there be another opportunity after Malaysia 2012? And it's so good to see that about 8.5 years down the line, he's finally had that opportunity to go right to the top step and take a race victory. And for the team as well, this is obviously a great win for Perez himself, and you could tell how emotional he was after the Grand Prix. Someone who's usually quite rock solid when it comes to his emotions. Yeah, he was really emotional at the end. But this is a team victory as well. You have to bear in mind that this is the first race victory for the team in 17 years. In Brazil 2003, Giancarlo Fisichella, the last time they took a victory, of course, in the Jordan guys at that point in time. And since that point, and you have to remember as well, they didn't exactly have the opportunity to celebrate that victory at the circuit because it was Kimi Raikkonen who was awarded the race win, and it was Fisichella who was awarded it afterwards. But 17 years in that time, the team's been sold. It became Midland. It became Spiker. It became Force India for a long time. It's become Racing Point now. There are going to be people within that team who have been there throughout that entire journey. And finally, after all those years, they're able to taste victory again. So, fair play to Perez. What a performance. The win itself, I don't think Perez would have been picky about how he took a race win, but what a way to do it. As he says, such an incredible run back through the field from last place. I remember saying at the time, Perez podium guaranteed. Clearly, I wasn't being optimistic enough, and the win was on the cards. But yeah, what a performance from Perez. Great for the team in terms of P3 in the championship as well. After such a difficult race last time out, they've come here and claimed 40 points. So, seems as if they have a very good chance of securing P3 in the championship. Well done to them all. And I mean, looking at the rest of the podium as well, because you've got Esteban Ocon as the first time podium for him. I guess his achievement has been somewhat overshadowed by the Perez debacle, the Russell debacle as well. Sam, is this what a moment for Esteban Ocon? And do you think this goes some way to helping his season overall versus Daniel Ricciardo? It hasn't been plain sailing the entire time.
100%. We have regularly said that Ricciardo has outshone Ocon throughout the season. Ricciardo's picked up 2 podiums, both third places mind, and Ocon has bettered that today. Yes, it took something of a bit of a dramatic race, but that doesn't take away the position. That doesn't take the final result away. That doesn't stop the fact that Ricciardo theoretically could have been that driver right there in second place, and he wasn't. Ocon was a bit under the radar, I think, for a lot of this Grand Prix. Held consistent pace, made some good moves, did well to hold off Lance Stroll in a race-winning car, as we've just seen, and came home for second place, and it was a little overshadowed. And I think, actually, Ocon has slowly grown throughout the season. And I still don't think that Ocon is going to be a world champion. I still don't think that Ocon is going to be one of the all-time greats. But I think this does show that Ocon is able to hold his own. It does show that Ocon is able to be a good, consistent driver for a strong team. And I think when Fernando comes back into the team next season, Ocon will have had that year back under his belt again, will be more comfortable. And I don't think it'll be as much of a walkover as maybe a few people have thought it would be. Ocon did a great job here today and should be given all the plaudits for it because he outshone his teammate today in what was a hectic race and one where Daniel Ricciardo regularly is the one picking up the piece and is able to cut through the field in such a race. Ocon was the man that was there. So round of applause for him, deserves that second place, and I really hope he gets some credit because it was a great drive.
What did you make of Ocon's performance, Harry?
Yeah, I mean, easily his best race this year. Has been slightly overshadowed by Perez. I mean, his move on Stroll when he came out of the pits was I think the most decisive we've seen Ocon be all year on track, and I think he did benefit from the VSC call when they brought Sainz and Ricardo in, and maybe was it Kvyat as well? I can't remember. But he still held on and made the strategy he was on work. And yeah, held off, as Sam said, held off Stroll in a car that won the race and probably should have been in front of him anyway. So yeah, this was a much more encouraging a drive from Ocon. And as DC said when he was interviewing him afterwards, it's a nice way to stamp his authority before a certain 2 times world champion rocks up in 2021. So yeah, I'm happy for Ocon because we know he's a solid driver and he's not had a bad year. He's just Ricciardo's had a better year and has certainly kind of showed Ocon the way. So yeah, I'm pleased to see Ocon up there. It was a good podium all round, if we're being honest, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think from Ocon's perspective, I would agree that he's had an okay year. I don't think he's been great, but at the same time, I do sympathise with his position coming into the team against someone who's got a year experience within the team and a decade's worth of experience in the sport. And it wasn't easy for Ocon coming into that spot at Renault. So I don't think he's had a bad season by any stretch of the imagination. I would say I think he has benefited from the circumstances here. Ultimately, I think he has benefited from not having a good qualifying session. His rivals, Daniel Ricciardo, his teammate, obviously, Carlos Sainz, the 2 AlphaTauris, the likes of Lance Stroll, they all got through to Q3, had to start on the soft tyre, and with Lance Stroll the exception, a lot of them came into the pits early on. Ocon was able to commit to a one-stop strategy, and I think that helped him out. So I think he's actually benefited from not putting together a great qualifying session. Having said that, he still needed to execute it, and it would have been very easy for him in his spot to feel the pressure and lose spots at the end of that Grand Prix. The strategy that he was on, it could well have opened the door for Lance Stroll, and indeed a lot of the other guys behind who were on the 2-stop and on much fresher tyres. And he didn't wilt under the pressure. He didn't keep up with Sergio Perez, but I think that was completely unrealistic to expect that to happen. And yeah, it would have been very easy for him to have been overtaken by cars behind. He didn't have the benefit of DRS, from pretty much the safety car ending onwards. So yeah, I give him full credit. I think he's deserved a podium at some point in his F1 career, considering the pace he had at Force India back in 17 and 18. So it was coming at some point. And yeah, I'm glad to see that he's finally got there. It's been a little bit overshadowed, but yeah, I don't think it's his best performance of the season, quite frankly, even though he has finished on the podium. But yeah, it does do something for when Alonso comes into the team that he's going to be there alongside somebody who has been on the podium rather than someone who is still waiting for the opportunity to do so. And then just a moment for Lance Stroll as well, because this is a pretty similar Grand Prix to the one in Monza, where he was able to take advantage of some carnage and end up in the top 3. Sam, what did you make of his performance? Of course, not the leading racing point, despite finishing 3rd.
Amazingly, if you were to say that Lance Stroll was finishing in 3rd place in a race before we kicked off, I'd have gone, Lance Stroll, congratulations, brilliant Grand Prix from you. But the fact that his teammate was the wrong way round, has damage, was last after lap 1, and was able to get all the way through the field. I know that we've had stoppages, we had restarts, but overtakes still had to be made, tyre conservation still had to be done, strategy still had to be employed. And Lance Stroll had such an advantage all of that, pretty much after. He went, 48 laps on soft tyres for crying out loud, which is brilliant, by the way. I still don't think that's good enough. Perez won the race. Lance Stroll has every opportunity to do exactly the same thing. He even said it himself when he got out the car. David Coulthard asked how he feels being on the podium again. And Lance said, good, not great, because I could have won this race. And he's right, he could have won this race. I think it's great to see Lance on the podium. I think it's great that he was still able to turn out a strong result. I think it's great that they've got the redemption from last time where he was upside down and Perez, of course, his engine didn't make it to the end. They now get a double podium to put them straight back into that fight for 3rd in the Constructors. But I do think that Lance himself will be expecting more from the position he was in, especially when his teammate won. And if you're looking at it logically, I think we can all expect maybe a little bit more to come from Lance when the car that he's in wings and he was in front of his teammate by at one point about 11 to 12 places. So it was good from Stroll. It was good. It's still promising for the future. It just wasn't good enough, I don't think. I think it still shows the deficit between Perez and Stroll, and I'm hoping that Stroll can pull that together, because now he goes up against Vettel, and Vettel could be on the beach and Stroll could look amazing, or Vettel could turn out the performances that Perez is currently doing, and again be beaten by someone else. So good from Stroll, but he can do more.
Yeah, and I can't believe this is actually the question, but Lance Stroll, who finished on the podium, Harry, do you think he did enough?
It's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, to be honest, if he wasn't going to win, because I think we generally accept that Perez is a quicker, more well-rounded driver than Stroll, then on the basis that Perez won the race, then Stroll should have been in second, and Ocon, as we said, probably shouldn't have been in second. He probably should have been behind the car that was faster. So yeah, it's a weird one. And to be honest, at least Stroll recognised that. He said he thought he could have won the race, but yeah, he probably should have been in second, which, yeah, that's a bizarre thing to say after a double podium for the team that's absolutely launched them into third place in the Constructors' Championship after, last weekend, he was literally on his head after the restart. So, yeah, it's a weird one. But yeah, in all honesty, he probably should have done a tiny bit more and at least been in P2, not P3.
Yeah, and I think it's worth bearing in mind as well, because there was obviously the safety car that completely changed the narrative of the Grand Prix. But one thing it didn't change was that Perez was very, very likely going to beat Lance Stroll anyway, even without that safety car, which should make people sit up and respect Perez's performance. I'm sure there will be more than a few who look at the Grand Prix and said he was just advantageous to the situation. And whilst I think that is true, I think that discredits what he actually did before the safety car came out. He was still on for a podium regardless, or at least very likely to finish on the podium regardless. What I will say about Lance Stroll, and I'm going to be quite complimentary here, because I'd like to compare Lance Stroll not only to Sergio Perez, where he doesn't look particularly favourable, but I think he deserves to be compared to the guys around him as well. The likes of Carlos Sainz, the likes of Daniel Ricciardo, the two Alpha Tauris, who he was in direct battle with at the beginning of the Grand Prix. Everyone was on the soft tyre at that moment in time. And Sam, you mentioned how long he went on those soft tyres, and he went well into the 40s in terms of the laps that he did. Just bear in mind that the likes of Lando Norris went 21 laps on the soft tyres, and pretty much everyone else went about 28, 29 laps on that first stint. So Lance Stroll hasn't just extended that first stint. He's extended it by an absolute mile, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. And it's something I've been quite critical of him in the past, actually, is his inability to manage tyres. So he's done a very good job with that today, and he deserves a lot of recognition. And on that second stint, he was put on the medium tyre for that second stint rather than the hard tyre. He did a very good job, I think, as well at the end of the Grand Prix, considering there were those behind him, such as Sainz, such as Ricciardo, who were on fresher rubber and couldn't get the advantage over him. So I think Stroll did have a good Grand Prix today. I think if you compare him to Perez, which he deserves to be, he doesn't look too favourably, but he also should be compared to the likes of the Renaults and the McLarens, in which case I think he did a pretty good job. Driver of the day, Sam, who have you got?
Sergio.
Right, that'll be Jack Aitken then. Yep.
Well, maybe we'll hear about Jack Aitken later on. Sergio, I know that, again, safety cars playing into it, but you have to run the race. You have to take advantage of everything. You make your own luck a lot of the time in Formula One, unless you're Valtteri Bottas. And Sergio did absolutely everything he possibly could. When you lose those top three cars, Verstappen, Bottas, usually Hamilton, but this time Russell, someone like Alexander Albon should have been there picking up the pieces. But it was Sergio Perez from last place on the grid. The man deserves driver of the day, and I'm giving it to him.
Harry, driver of the day?
It's hard to argue past Sergio Perez, but for the sake of variety, I'm going to give it to George Russell, because he should have been driving a Williams this weekend, and he wasn't, and he was thrown into a Mercedes, and to be honest, he shouldn't have been anywhere near Bottas, and he smashed it for most of the race. So, I absolutely agree with what Sam said with Checo, but for the sake of variety, I will give it to Georgie Russ. the Russell hustle, which is the best thing Crofty's ever said, if we're being completely honest.
Yeah, we're doing the Russell hustle in a bustle. That actually might be my favourite thing he's ever uttered.
Also, can we? This is a completely side note. Why did Crofty and Ronald have so much difficulty recognizing whose Mercedes team radio was which? They had
I
some
don't
real
know.
issues with that.
Yeah.
Like
Also,
they thought Bottas had a puncher. No, that was Bono. Like, come on, man.
yeah, it really threw me when they rang out something else. I thought for a second that, hold on, have we got it all wrong and Bottas just has more luck? But then Russell came in. Also, I do love, just to get on the commentary, that Crofty will just waffle on. He'll say about 1 million words in about 2 minutes. And at the end, Brundle just goes, absolutely. And just ignores everything that Crofty said. He's like, okay, moving on. It's hilarious and I love it.
Anyway, sorry,
I
Ben.
think
Driver
it's
of the
'cause
day
he
for you, mate.
No, fair enough. Yeah, I'm going to give it to Sergio Perez, and I don't think it's really close, to be perfectly honest. I think George Russell did a very good job, and we'll come on to him in a little bit, what kind of a performance he put in. But Sergio Perez was last under the safety car. And yes, considering the power of the Racing Point and the Merc engine that powers it, yes, he should have got past the likes of the Alphas and the Williams fairly quickly on that first stint, which he did do. But we saw actually that overtaking wasn't particularly easy despite the layout of the circuit. We saw these DRS trains form, particularly with the likes of Sainz and Ricciardo, the Alpha Tauris, Lance Stroll in the first stint. There wasn't actually a lot of overtaking that happened between these guys. It's not as if they were switching positions every 2 seconds like we saw in the Formula 2 race. So I think Perez's job of cutting his way through the field is not going under the radar, but it really shouldn't be underappreciated what he was able to do. And like I said before, if the safety car doesn't make an appearance, he finishes P3 behind the 2 Mercedes, in which case I'm still giving him driver of the day because he's managed to get a podium after being last at one point in the Grand Prix. And the most ironic thing is, and we give Perez a lot of credit for his tyre management, he said afterwards in that post-race interview that he actually locked up massively under that first safety car and really struggled with vibrations on those first set of medium tyres, that he still managed to take about 4 years. If it was anyone else, they probably would have come into the pits after about 5 laps. So Sergio Perez, sensational job from him. Driver of the day for me, without a shadow of a doubt. Worst driver of the day, Sam?
I mean, the usual culprits are going to get a mention. Bottas was completely outclassed. I'm going to talk about the bits before he got hit by some bad luck, because he did get hit by some bad luck. I mean, the tyre change was an absolute mess for both cars, but it did really hurt Bottas, the fact that he was on those on the same set of hard tyres. They got taken off, they all had a coffee, and then went, oh, put the tyres back on, and he got the same ones, which isn't really fair. But Bottas wasn't good enough anyway. He lost the start, lost the lead off the start, and a tank slapper was then swamped by the guys behind him while George Russell had already driven to Abu Dhabi and back again. It wasn't good enough from the guy that realistically should be thrashing a rookie into the team. You know, everyone said at the start of this weekend, if Russell could finish 4th or 5th, or, you know, without any incident, which he did have, then great job from Russell. Well done, Russell. That wasn't the case. Russell was the better driver out of the 2 Mercedes drivers pretty much the entire race weekend. So yeah, Bottas is up there. Albon, I think, he benefited massively from everything that went on around him. He should be the one mopping up the pieces, like I said already. I'm not giving him worst driver of the day because he did manage to get himself up to 6th place from 12th, but he shouldn't be starting that far back anyway. And I don't think, unfortunately, rookie Jack Aitken had a great time of it. Had one of the most hilarious rookie crashes I've seen in a long time. Ironic that he is in the car that Russell left for the race, and that caused Russell's downfall. So I'm going to just give it to Bottas, but there were a few guys about that were not good enough.
Are we adding Jack Aitken to the list of drivers Sam hates?
I don't hate him!
Well, Harry, do you hate Aitken as much as Sam clearly does, or have you got someone else in mind? I
mean, I agree. The spin from Aitken was a rookie error, and yeah, the irony is very strong that it kind of caused the complete chaos in the Mercedes stops. I am going to give it to despite his god status from qualifying yesterday, I'm going to have to
No.
give it to Chuck
No.
Leclerc.
No!
I am because yesterday was absolutely incredible. I don't know how he put that car in fourth place. Ridiculous scenes, like absolutely ridiculous. And then he threw it all away. And I know it's the first lap, but last weekend we heard Seb complaining, and I'm not saying that Seb was justified in that, but we've seen it on first laps before with Leclerc. He is so good. He's so quick. But sometimes I know he's still young, but sometimes he does make these rash moves, and the one where he sent it out the inside was rash to say the least. And he almost took out the race winner, and that would have been sad. But yeah, I'm going to give it to Leclerc just because yesterday it was such a downfall from yesterday. But yeah, I also agree that Bottas wasn't particularly great, but for me, Charles Leclerc, you're still a god, but just stop doing that.
Honestly, I mean, God Leclerc is something I like to call that. I was going to say call that man, but call that God a lot of the time. Because he does produce some of these epic laps. And that lap on Saturday was sensational. But you're right, that first lap incident was poor. So I'm actually not going to completely revoke his God status. But for the foreseeable future, he will be godlike Leclerc. He's not quite. Yeah, Jesus Leclerc, he will be known as for the foreseeable future until he does gain back his status, which I'm sure he will. But just see this as a bit of a warning, Charles. I'm sure he will. Anyway, worst driver of the day for me. I'm going to go with Lando Norris. Someone I've given driver of the day to a few times this year, but it was just a bad weekend for him. His qualifying performance was off. We saw him out in Q2, which is not something we see very often at all. And in the Grand Prix, he got the start that he needed in that he started 19th place. And by the time of that safety car, he was 10th. He couldn't have had a more perfect first lap if he tried. So why wasn't he able to make the progress from there? He was on the same tyre. He was on that soft tyre, much like Sainz and Ricciardo and everyone else was. So really, he should have been able to keep up with that group and go, and do something valuable in this Grand Prix. But he had to bail out on his strategy very early on. He came into the pits after 21 laps. I don't think anyone else made a pit stop until about lap 28. So he did a really poor job on those tyres in his first stint, and he never really looked like threatening thereafter. He got a bit lucky with the safety car coming back into contention, but he was strangely off the pace compared to Carlos Sainz. Not something we see very often. So I'll give it to Lando Norris. Moment of the race, Sam.
Oh, I mean, there were a lot of moments.
That's a good summation of the race. Thank you. Move on.
If anyone would like to put that as a quote on Sky Sports highlight, there were a lot of moments.
It's already there.
I think, honestly, Sergio Perez crying over the radio, it showed how much it meant to him. He has actually, I've just looked it up, taken the record for most race starts before getting his first win with 190 to get away from Mark Webber. And that was brilliant. And I think if anything says, get Albon out of that seat and put me in it, I don't know what does. I don't know what more he could physically do to get himself a Formula One drive for next season. So for me, that really was like come on, look at me. Are you not entertained? I'm Sergio Perez. And he deserves every second of the glory.
I'd love Sergio to quote that. Are you not entertained? I'm Sergio Perez. Harry, what's your moment of the day?
I'm going to go for. I again agree with Sam. That was a great moment. I'll go for Russell going around the outside of Bottas, because that was
spicy. Play the meme.
Oh, hang on. That was.
You like it a little bit spicy. Oh yes. Yeah, boy.
Yeah, thank you, Ainsley Harriott. I'm sorry if there are people who are listening to this who have no idea who Ainsley Harriott is. You should look him up. He's God.
I'm sorry that they don't know who he is. That's a horrible way to live a life.
You're missing out.
Yeah, that is true. Please look him up. I'll go for Russell around the outside of Bottas. I know Bottas was on older tyres and he felt like a stone at the end. But he made the mistake, which allowed Russell to get close. And I think there are so many drivers, good, quick drivers out there who would have thought twice about doing that move. It's so dusty around the outside there. I know we saw a couple of drivers do it in F2, but yeah, kudos to him. So I'll give that a moment of the race.
I'll just go for Perez crossing the line as the winner. Epic moment in what has been just a season full of epic moments. I know we haven't had a championship challenge like we would have hoped, and that's been the case for the last few years. But, I mean, take the races individually. This has been an epic season. So much has happened, and Perez winning a Grand Prix for the first time really topped it all off. You say that if Red Bull hadn't been taking notice before and they're taking notice now, if that win had to be the thing that got their attention, you're idiots, because you should have been paying attention to him long before this race win. You know, just because this is the one where he's taken race victory. He's been putting together epic performances all year, but this might have been the most epic. So good to see, particularly when it has been such a journey for him. If you think back to when he was classified as a pay driver, completely unfairly, by the way, you think of the season he had at McLaren. At that point, after 2013, there was a question as to whether he would even come back at that point. Force India decided to give him a chance, and finally, after 6-7 years with the team, he's given them a race win. So, epic moment.
I mean, George Russell needed a PowerPoint. That was Sergio Perez's PowerPoint. PowerPoint on the bloody top step of the race. Also, hilarious that Netflix are following George Russell. Netflix should go nowhere near Mercedes because it just ruins them every single time.
Yeah, I mean, I know they didn't do the first series. I can't see them doing series 4. Not after this.
Run away.
Run far.
I mean, I know obviously Russell's was involved this weekend, but surely if Netflix being around causes bad things for Mercedes, they should follow them every weekend.
I agree. Yeah,
I'd be up for that. might actually get a championship challenge. Who knows? We'll move on to Mercedes actually, because Russell versus Bottas was definitely the most talked about thing going into the Grand Prix weekend. Qualifying very, very close. Bottas managed to clinch pole position, but it was the finest of margins in which he did so. Not a good start for Valtteri Bottas. George Russell took the lead into turn 1. He actually built up a few second advantage even before the safety car made an appearance. George Russell did a fine job at the safety car restart, held the lead even after he got a bit of an advantage in the pit stops, with Bottas pitting a few laps afterwards. Then obviously the safety car and what happened, that was the start of the derailing process. We're still not sure at this point in time whether he's going to be disqualified from the Grand Prix for using Bottas's set of tyres. We'll see what happens on that one. But in terms of his performance, Sam, what did you make of it?
Russell or Bottas? Because I got a little bit lost.
Russell.
Thank you. I got a little bit lost in your intro there. It was majestic to listen to. Russell was phenomenal. He was phenomenal. If you were turning up to Formula One for the first time, you would. I wouldn't blame you for thinking that Russell was normally driving that car. He showed Bottas up, and I think Bottas needs to be a little bit nervous, because the thing is, Russell's never gone toe-to-toe with Hamilton, so we can't do that same comparison. Who knows? Maybe if Bottas unfortunately got COVID or got an illness, and Russell had to step into Bottas's seat against Hamilton, for all we know, Russell could have done the same thing. But we don't know that. It's hypothetical. What we do know is that Russell in qualifying was less than half of 1/10 away, and in the race, at one point, he was 11 seconds clear of Valtteri Bottas, the man that has picked up race wins, pole positions, has been second in the championship, and he ruined him. He ruined him. If that race ran to the end without that final safety car, Russell would have crossed that line comfortably, well in front of Valtteri Bottas. Bottas was showing up today, and this was always going to be a bad case for Bottas, regardless of what happened. We said this in our race preview. We said that Bottas had to decimate George Russell. It needed to be kind of a 15, 20, 25-second win for Bottas to even look good in this situation. It didn't even look good. It didn't even look all right. Bottas looks bad here, and I think that this will turn heads. We all know that George Russell was going to be moving to Mercedes anyway at some point. The guy deserves it. He's a great racer. We know that he's showing it now, right? we know that we've all talked about how Norris, right, has had time to fight in the midfield to prove that he's quick, whereas Russell's been stuck in that Williams. We don't know what he's up to. He's throwing away chances to get points. None of that was his fault today, and he was going to win this race had the strategy basically gone his way. He was by far the better of the two in that team. And I do think that Bottas now needs to start looking over his shoulder, and I think he's got less than a year to start putting in some absolute stellar performances. Basically, if Bottas doesn't win the championship in 2021, I don't think he drives a Mercedes after the next season, because Russell's drive was concise, it was controlled, he was aware of where he was losing time and where he could make up time, he pushed it just to the edge. The overtake was stunning around the outside. The guy was just on it. In a car that doesn't fit him properly, in shoes that are too small, he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And I'm excited to see him when he gets to the front, because I think he could be a world champion very, very soon. It was a great drive from Russell, and Bottas devastatingly bad in comparison.
What did you make of his performance, George Russell? That is, Harry.
Yeah, I agree with Sam. I don't know. I didn't expect him to be. I didn't expect him to be so close in qualifying, and I did not expect him to lead the majority of the race today and lead it quite so convincingly. Look, we said before the weekend started that it's a difficult. It seemed difficult for Bottas to come out this weekend looking good, even if he did win. And yeah, he's not come out looking great because Russell's just been. I think the way his attitude towards it as well has been, pretty impressive, and he definitely talks more on the radio than Hamilton does. But no one's going to blame him for him asking more questions. I think what really struck me was how normal it seemed watching lap one and the rest of the laps, or first half of the Grand Prix. How normal it seemed for the other Mercedes to be overtaking Bottas at the start, and for that Mercedes to pull away and have a solid gap, and the tyres were fine. Although, to be honest, did we notice when he said the tyres were good? I don't think Bono knew what to do with himself.
You mean you don't have a problem with the tyres?
What do you mean your tyres aren't gone? Good? What does that mean?
Bono! Yeah. My tyres are all right, actually. Yeah, they're fine.
Don't worry about it, mate.
Yeah, that's what. But my point is, it just seemed so. I'm not. Look, if anyone jumps down my throat, I'm not saying he's as good as Hamilton, but it was that kind of Hamilton-esque style. It's what we've come to be used to with Hamilton. If he doesn't get pole position, he often jumps Bottas at the start, and then Bottas doesn't have a chance for the rest of the race. So I think that's what really struck me there. So yeah, I don't know what Bottas has to do. Maybe it is a championship next year to do anything to secure a drive, because it's got to really hurt Bottas for his future prospects that Mercedes that today has.
So just to clarify, the conclusion from that is that Harry thinks that Russell is better than Hamilton.
Yeah, tweeting it now.
By a long way, I think he might have mentioned as well, but unconfirmed. So George Russell, we did reference this on the preview podcast, that George Russell can't lose and Valtteri Bottas can only lose from this weekend. George Russell is a brilliant talent, and Valtteri Bottas knows that, and anyone who knows anything about Formula One knows that, considering what he was able to do in Formula 2, GP3 as it was at the time, and what he's been able to do at Williams as well. People know how good he is, and even though he was stepping into a car that isn't his own, Bottas has been driving that car all season long and been with Mercedes since 2017. It was always going to be a challenge for Bottas against Russell to come out looking good. I think in qualifying, people were critical of Bottas from qualifying, even though he did get pole position because it was by a slender margin. I'll give Bottas credit for qualifying, because it would have been really, really easy for him to crumble under the pressure. Would have been so easy for him to concede that pole position, and he didn't. He just about pulled it out the bag, and I think realistically he had another tenth or two in there. So I think he had him covered in qualifying. And just to say as well, Bottas is on the pace with Hamilton in qualifying. We've referenced this all year. Bottas is fine on Saturdays. Yes, Hamilton just about edges it, 60% of the time. But, Hamilton's a great qualifier. He's one of the best of all time. So there's no disrespect to Bottas in that whatsoever. So actually, I think if Hamilton was in that car alongside Russell, there's every chance that Russell would have outqualified Hamilton. I think it's more likely that Hamilton would have outqualified Russell by a small margin. But because Russell got so close to Bottas, I think there's every chance that Russell would have also got close to Hamilton, if not beaten him. However, in the race, and you alluded to this just a moment ago, if you had, if you were to replace on the bar on the left-hand side, the tower as they call it, that has all the timings, if you were to replace Russell's name with Hamilton, would you have thought anything was out of place in that Grand Prix, at least up until the safety car happened? No, not at all. You would have assumed that that was absolutely fine because that was the stock Mercedes race where Bottas, he's claimed pole positions quite a few times this year. Hamilton has regularly got ahead of him early on, and then Hamilton has built out a few second gap and maintained it. There didn't seem any problem whatsoever in that first stint with Russell holding that lead over Valtteri Bottas. I think it was about 1.8 seconds after 10 laps. After 23 laps, it was 1.8 seconds. It literally didn't change. I think up until the pit stop, it was about 3 seconds. So it never really got outside about a 1.2 second gap between the closest between the two guys and the furthest away. Russell was controlling it. There didn't seem any problem whatsoever. It was such a mature performance from someone not only so young, but so inexperienced for the position that he was in. And Valtteri Bottas, yes, it did seem as if he was clawing back some of that advantage after the pit stop. It would have been fascinating to see whether he would have carried that on. He did get his regular spout of bad luck, obviously. But I do want to mention this because I think this is being blown out way out of proportion as to what actually happened. Because he went out on the hard tyres that he pitted onto. So he's essentially on old hard tyres compared to Russell on fresh mediums. And yes, as a result of that, Russell should have the advantage over Bottas. But there is no excuse whatsoever for Bottas not holding the advantage against a lot of other guys out there. Bear in mind that those hard tyres were not that old. They were fresher than the tyres than all of the top three had on. So why was he dropping positions to guys behind him, whereas the likes of Ocon and Perez and Stroll were carrying on absolutely fine? I feel as if the commentary team were making it out that Bottas had these tyres on that had gone through 3 world wars and done 200,000 miles. They'd only done about 30 laps. They should have been absolutely fine, yet he still dropped position. For me, that was the most disappointing part of Valtteri Bottas' race. And big question, I'm not even sure whether it would be achievable, but Sam, do you think that Mercedes should explore the possibility of getting George Russell in that car alongside Lewis Hamilton, or is that an overreaction?
I mean, it's tough because if you're going to just look at raw pace of drivers, Russell seems to already have the edge of Bottas. I mean, I would like to see them on a track that's a bit more intricate, maybe. Maybe let's go back to the Nürburgring, or let's go to a track that suits Bottas, like Russia, and see what the performance is there. We've looked at it on a one-race basis, and we've seen Hamilton. Hamilton's been beaten by Bottas before. That doesn't mean that Bottas is suddenly better than Hamilton, right? You can't base your entire career off one race. And I think that helps Bottas' case right now. Also, what helps Bottas' case is, and it's been said by the team publicly multiple times, we've never had a more cohesive, positive, enjoyable environment in our garage. Hamilton and Bottas work brilliantly together. They like each other a lot. They don't fret about things behind the scenes. They don't clash heads. They work as a team. And who comes out on top gets a handshake and a pat on the back from the other guy and goes, well done, you drove better than me. I need to work on it. That suits a world champion winning team. They need one driver in first, they need another driver in second. Russell, on the other hand, that guy is going to take over from Hamilton. It just depends whether you want to get him in here now and let Hamilton and Russell fight it out and let Hamilton maybe coach Russell for a little while to even improve him even further. But you know what? Sorry, Russell. I can't believe I'm saying this. It makes sense to keep Bottas in that seat for longer while Hamilton is in the sport. The moment that Hamilton leaves the sport, whether it be this season, whether he gets to the end of his virus it's going through and he feels unwell and it doesn't go right for him, which is horrible to say, and he says, okay, I'm done. Then put Russell in, yes. But I don't think we've seen enough from Russell across a long period of time to go, yeah, Bottas out, Russell in. I need to see a few more races to really know that they're good to go. Because currently, what are Mercedes doing wrong? They've won everything, and both their drivers are first and second. So for me, it's not enough to swap it out after just one result. But don't get me wrong, Russell showed World Championship winning signs. He will be in that car soon, and he will be a race winner. I have no doubt about it. It's just not just yet.
Are you on that line of thinking, Harry?
I mean, fortunately, for the sake of Jeopardy and our podcast, I actually disagree with Sam. But I do absolutely see his points about Mercedes, and it's so cohesive, and it's worked for them for the past how many years Bottas has been there now? 4 years. This is year 4. So yeah, I absolutely take that point. Why mess with that? But I think what Mercedes need to be careful of, and I don't know whether I put Russell in the car next year or not, but I think they need to be careful of getting absolutely slapped in the face when Hamilton does decide to call it a day. And if for whatever reason Russell isn't available or gets taken up and they're left with Bottas and another driver, who that is, I don't know, they may struggle, because you may get situations like today when you got Bottas, who can't make his way up through the field again. And I know on a normal day he'd still be in a chance of winning. But yeah, it's definitely giving them a headache. That is for sure. It kind of all depends on Lewis, doesn't it? Which is really tricky, because it depends how long he's going to stick around for. But it's got to be at the back of Toto and everyone who's in charge of Mercedes. It's got to be at the back of their minds, because, like I say, I think they will be in danger of losing out if they don't get Russell in sooner rather than later. I do think he'll be in the car in 22, no matter what happens. But I'm also wrong a lot of the time.
I mean, you predicted Perez would get a podium, and you were right about that. So maybe not.
Wrong step, but it was on the podium.
It still counts. I'm going to say here that there should be that crossover opportunity. I think it would make sense for Mercedes. And the part of the problem is they might not know when Hamilton wants to call it a day. They don't know whether it is going to be at the end of potentially this season, whether it's going to be the end of next season, or whether he's going to go for another 5 years. There's no way of them knowing that for sure. However, if they can work with him and they can do some guesswork, or maybe even Hamilton can just tell them outright, they can put together some sort of plan to get Russell in that car long term. And I think I would like to see that crossover year. So I would like to see Hamilton and Russell in the same car for 1 year before Hamilton calls it a day, to get that coaching aspect, as you referenced, Sam. Because, and as you referenced, Harry, I don't think they want that situation where Hamilton calls it a day and they are caught off guard, because whilst the likes of George Russell are, I don't want to say wasting time in Williams, but treading water almost, you've got the likes of Leclerc and Verstappen who are in, positions to, well, maybe not Leclerc this year, but positions to win races and gain podiums and get stuck in the front of the grid. And Russell, apart from this weekend, isn't getting that opportunity at the moment. They don't want to be caught out like that if they can help it. For George Russell this weekend, the result doesn't matter at all. Obviously, it would have been great to see George Russell get a win. Would have been great to see him get a podium. But to be honest, doesn't matter at all. Because all that mattered this weekend was the performance and showing Mercedes what he can do. And he said this quite a lot of times with Williams, with the results obviously not coming in for the team. He knows that the people who matter most to his career know what a job he is doing. So it's the same thing today. Didn't get the result he wanted, but he got the performance he needed to show. And this is something I referenced in the preview podcast. This was a glimpse into the future. Lewis Hamilton is not going to be around forever. At some point, he is going to leave the sport, and they are going to be left to build a dynasty with someone else. And who is that person going to be? This weekend, we got a glimpse as to whether Valtteri Bottas can be that number one driver when they need him to be so. The answer was conclusively no, he can't be. And I'm a big fan of Valtteri Bottas, and I've stuck up for him a lot of times. And I'll continue to do so, because I think he is a great driver, and he is a great second driver. But for me, this weekend confirmed that when Hamilton steps aside, Valtteri Bottas cannot be the lead driver going forward, because they will not carry on in that same vein. And whether it is George Russell, which I think it should be, or whether it's someone else, they need to plan for that. This was a big weekend for Valtteri Bottas. Did he pass the test? For me, the answer, definitely no, he didn't.